you're standing here. I think it's called leverage.
Gotta look at the details.
Yeah. We all in?
Together.
Jim, Warren, come on up.
Dennis, you want to come over here, Warren?
Carlos, Hydra. Excellent. Yeah,
Yes, it is.
yeah, it's great. Thank you all very much for coming down today, and I'm very appreciative that we have assembled with us members of the school board and the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and we have representatives from labor and leaders in the educational community, as well as our superintendent of schools, all gathered around one principle, and that is to address the crisis in public education, not just in this country, in this state, but very specifically the crisis that exists here today in the city and county of San Francisco, with $51 million shortfall at our San Francisco Unified School District projected over the next 16 months. As some of you have noted, and some of you have chronicled, some literally chronicled, others figuratively chronicled, we are looking at hundreds and hundreds of layoffs in our public education system. The governor recently, in concert with the Democratic legislature, agreed to $8.4 billion in state cuts. We were already 47th in the nation in per pupil spending. Clearly, we are on a race to not the top, but to the bottom. And as a consequence, we put a lot of pressure, the state has put a lot of pressure on local school districts, and San Francisco Unified is no exception. This $51 million, Carlos Garcia, the superintendent, will amplify what that means more specifically in terms of the totality of layoffs for teachers and paraprofessionals and the like, but nonetheless, it puts a chill into the hearts and minds of every parent in the public school system and every young child that is aware, remarkably aware, and is absorbing this news where they fear that their teacher will be laid off, they fear that their school will be closed, and that has a very real impact on the lives of young people. And I want to underscore that. Just the news alone sends a message that puts our kids at risk of further stress and anxiety. They should be focusing on their schoolwork and their classroom, not necessarily on whether or not their teacher is going to be back, someone that clearly they've developed a strong relationship. So as a consequence to long-windedly, as a consequence to deal with this, we are once again coming forward unified in this city. The school district and the city family and community leaders saying that the citizens of San Francisco deserve more and deserve better, that we're all in this together, that while we recognize we're not policymakers at the school district, we are principally responsible with the school district for the quality of education and quality of support and the quality of lives of our young people. And that's why we are committing ourselves, as we did last year, to submit a portion of our rainy day reserve to help offset the cuts to our teachers in particular at our unified school district. Last year we submitted $19.2 million of our rainy day reserve to the public schools. This year we may not be as well positioned to do an equivalent amount. And this is a cause of some concern, but nonetheless should be a cause of some celebration that at least we can do this. We have committed to date, and this is a number that may move, and I hope up, not down, but a number that is by no means etched in stone. But today we are together with the leadership of the Board of Supervisors led by David Chu, and in particular a point person this year, Supervisor Gavin, who has been a champion of public schools. We're contributing a minimum of $11.5 million. That will offset by anywhere from 133 to 166 or 160 layoffs, 133 to 160 layoffs in our public schools. That is not insignificant, but we know it does not address the totality of the problem. We're still working through the numbers and the math. These numbers are fluid. I talked to a number of you yesterday and expressed that there is still a lot of things that are changing as we speak in terms of the federal stimulus and the expectation we can draw down some $23 million from the federal stimulus to our school district, the prospect that we could do more than that. The state and some of the calculation that's still being done as it relates to our rainy day reserve and what it means for the city and our ability to draw down the money. The controller is still working on those numbers. And so I want to underscore that this is a preliminary estimate of what the city can do, but this number is subject to change. But nonetheless, the district should expect at least $11.5 million, and that reduces the likelihood of at least 133 to as many as 160 teachers facing layoffs into the new fiscal year. Finally, I just want to again recognize the extraordinary leadership of Jim Durkee, of Dennis Kelly, of our biggest champion for public schools in San Francisco, Warren Hellman, who is here, to the new president of the Board of Supervisors that's taking this baton and taking public education seriously, to see Eric Marr, of course, who's as familiar with public education as any human being in this room, having served on the school board, the president of the school board now, Kim Sri Mavis, for being here, the great leadership that has been exercised by other new members of the board that are here, David Campos, in addition to Eric Marr, and of course those that have been here for a number of years, Sophie Maxwell, that was here last year supporting this resolution and this effort led by then Tom Amiano, to the great work of our former budget, one of our budget directors who understands the math of this as well or better than anybody, Carmen Chu, and of course Bevan Dufty and Ross Mercarimi that are leading the efforts here today. So again, thank you to Ross Mercarimi and thank you to Bevan. And finally, perhaps most importantly, because no one has a bigger audience on education from my perspective, or no one has my ear more disproportionately than Hydra Mendoza, our liaison to the school board, who made sure that there was no deviation from my commitment and our rhetorical commitment to education, and that we at least had to get the frame of $11.5 million, but she still wants to see more. And I understand all of you still want to see more, and we're hopeful we can advance even more resources with the support of the Board of Supervisors. But again, we want to thank Bevan Dufty in particular for authoring a resolution which he'll talk about that basically codifies our collective efforts between the executive and legislative branch, that I think will give people some confidence that we mean business in terms of our commitment and our resolve to actually address this crisis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, everyone. I think what you see here is an incredible level of commitment from the Board of Supervisors and the Board of Education. Carlos Garcia, the first time I heard him speak, said that we have to put children first, and I think that that's what you're seeing here at City Hall. Even in the most difficult of time, we have a responsibility to support public education and to ensure that San Francisco's children come first. I want to briefly acknowledge now Assemblymember Tom Amiano, who had the vision and wisdom to create the constructs that you see before us, both in the Prop H, the Public Education Enrichment Fund, and in the Rainy Day Fund, a mechanism that we hope is going to be very meaningful to the school board and to our school superintendent in rescinding as many layoffs as possible. And I think that that's the clearest message that we collectively want to send to the teachers, educators, and staff of the school district, and to the parents and children, that they matter. And even in this difficult time, we are going to stand together and we're going to make sacrifice so that we are able to rescind these notices, because they have a devastating and debilitating effect upon teachers, and we don't want them to leave. We've had a couple of hundred additional kindergarten applications this year, and that's the direction we want to see the school district go in. We've come far too far and made too much progress in recent years to see that rolled back. I want to also acknowledge Warren Hellman, who has been, if Tom Amiano is the father, Warren would be the godfather, who's been behind the scenes making sure that we have the types of campaigns that can prevail, whether it's the school parcel tax or the school bond measures or Prop H. He's really been behind the scenes, as Mayor Newsom indicated, making it possible for us to communicate to the public, and they have supported us heartily on every occasion. So with that, I think I'd like to invite my colleagues to come up and start with our board president, David Chu.
I'm not going to repeat what was just said, but very, very briefly, I think this is an unprecedented showing of unity of our elected officials here, from the Board of Supervisors to our school board, to our mayor, to our leaders from the education community, really understanding that we need to put our kids first. we're talking about an unprecedented challenge that we have. $8.4 billion being cut from the state level, $51 million being cut to our kids here locally. And so I just want to thank Supervisor Dufty and the mayor and the leaders from the education community and all of my colleagues who have already spent many years working on these issues. We will be there for our families, we will be there for our teachers, and we will be there for our kids.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to acknowledge that Supervisor Alioto-Pierre and Supervisor Avalos have also co-sponsored this, so 9 out of the 11 members have already indicated their support. I'm going to work by seniority. Supervisor Sophie Maxwell.
Smart.
That works for me. That works for me. Let me just say, I think this shows a commitment that San Francisco has and this board has for equality, for equal education, so that education is not just for those who can afford a good education, but for everyone, and that's what we're here to make sure happens in our city. This is good for all of us. Thank you.
And someone who's fought to keep us from closing schools, our colleague, Supervisor Ross Mercarimi.
You know, that's okay. It's all been said for me. I'm
Okay.
here in support.
Supervisor Carmen Chu.
Well done.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for coming out, that we know that many of the issues that we face in the city are very much tied to all the things that we see happen at the school district. So I'm very happy to be supportive however we can to the school district.
Thank you. Supervisor David Campos.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a couple of points. I think this is truly about righting a wrong that has been done to our children in Sacramento. I do think that 11.5 seems a little low. I'm interested in looking at how that number was arrived at, and certainly look forward to working with the mayor on that. And the other thing that I would say that it's not just important that we protect the rainy day fund. I think as we talk about what happens to our children in our schools and outside our schools, it's not just the rainy day fund that's important. You also have Prop H, but you also have the children's fund. I think that anyone who's committed to making sure that we do right by our kids needs to make sure that all of those sources of funding are protected as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And Supervisor Eric Marr.
Let me just say that I'm going to take off my supervisor hat and my former school board hat to say that as a parent of an 8-year-old and a spouse of a teacher like John Avalos is as well, that I'm outraged by the cuts that many school districts and San Francisco are having to make. I think $11.5 million is not enough, so I'll work with my colleagues to try to make sure that there's adequate funding. I'm really proud to be part of this coalition of the outraged that will fight for adequate funding for schools. Schools are a critical part of the safety net, like human services, that we need to protect in this difficult budget crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I want to invite up Superintendent Garcia, and I understand there are 2 representatives from Parents for Public Schools, John and Suzanne, if they could come forward to be able to speak in a few minutes. Superintendent.
Good morning. We're obviously very thrilled that we have a coalition of people all standing up for children. And I really want to thank the Board of Supervisors and particularly the mayor for stepping forward and saying that kids are going to come first. As you know, the hits that we're taking now are just catastrophic. We've never seen these types of hits in public education. Just to give you an idea, the layoffs that we're talking about is approximately 10% of all our teachers in San Francisco. And that's just in a time where finally our enrollment is increasing. This year, our kindergarten enrollment is up by about 500 kids signing up for kindergarten, which is the highest that we've had in ages here in San Francisco. How at a time when we're building and getting excitement about the public schools, we just take the rug from underneath it, and it's really devastating. And when you talk about the hits, they talk about $51 million over 16 months, but as of right now, we've had to cut $22 million out of this budget. And because we planned for it last year and because we managed to get the rainy day fund, we're able to handle that hit. But for next year, you should know that the hit for the school district will be $29 million. So we're glad to hear that the rainy day fund is available. Obviously, like everybody else, we'd like to see that number grow significantly because there is a 25% of the reserve that we're going to try to convince these folks that maybe they ought to support us, because if we did, we could rescind all the layoffs in the entire school district. But we recognize that it's hard economic times, not only for the school district, but also for the city. for all of us. So it's going to be tough. But even if we, just so you understand, even if we get the 11.5 million, which is great for us, we'd still be laying off approximately 200 teachers. So that's still a large number that we're going to be working with. But it's a great start. I think that we're here together. It's a really complicated issue. If you look at school districts across the state, we're blessed here in San Francisco that these folks behind me, stepped up to have a rainy day fund, and Tom Amiano to think of that, because in most school districts, they're facing situations that are even more devastating than us. This isn't just a San Francisco issue. This is an issue for the entire state. And quite frankly, I think we ought to be ashamed of our state for not stepping up, and our own selves for not stepping up and caring enough about children. How is it possible that we're the 8th richest economy in the world, and yet we're now 47th, and after this budget, we're going to be close to being 50th, dead last in per pupil allocation? If you don't think that makes a difference, think about this. Right now, we're $2,400. Before this budget, before the cuts even start, we're $2,400 below the national average on how much we spend per children. I don't know about you. I call that a disgrace. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. As you've heard many speakers indicate that there is a set of calculations that are going to be done. I do want to indicate that City Controller Ben Rosenfield is not here, but he is in his office for any media that want to talk to him, because obviously it's going to... All right. 554-7500, okay? Now I want to welcome up the President of the Board of Education, Kim Shree-Moffat.
Thank you. I just want to say briefly how we as citizens of California and San Francisco, our number one in San Francisco, are really grateful to our partners. This is an incredible relationship that we have with the city from the Board of Education, as you can see. The Board of Education with the superintendent, and then the Board of Supervisors with the mayor, to come together and discuss education of the students here in San Francisco in a way that lets you know at home that we care collectively about the kids and the teachers in schools. There is no question about that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that as citizens of California, we are not powerless here. It seems as though we're powerless and we are just getting figures and figures from Sacramento and we have to swallow them. That's not correct. These are the times when we need to call outside of San Francisco to those legislators who are not helping and who are hurting our kids, not just here in San Francisco, but across the state. I was grateful to hear our president say he was sending down money to keep teachers in the classroom, and because he cares about school children. That's the kind of leadership we need here in California and in Sacramento. Please do not hesitate to contact legislators who are not helping us. That's what I'd like you to do at home. Please don't be afraid to do that. You are not powerless as citizens of this state, of this city, and of this country.
I want to welcome up Citizen Warren Hellman, if he could come and say a few words to us.
Yes. I thought you were going to say Citizen Kane. So I'll try to make this long. But I think these are you've heard it all, these are very difficult times. We're faced with problems that seem insurmountable. There's one piece of good news, I think, which is we now have the best team. If there was a Super Bowl for cooperation in a community to solve a problem, we sure have it. We sure have a Super Bowl winner in San Francisco. And I think, several years ago, this coalition started to be built, and we, the Board of Education, the Board of Supervisors, the Mayor's Office, teachers, have all decided we got real problems ahead of us, and the problems do not really involve spending most of our time scrapping with each other. And it sort of started to come together, I think, on Prop H, was it not? Mm-hmm. And, I think Prop H was a success. The last school bond issue was a success. And by the time of the parcel tax, we were really rolling. And I think it's not going to be a set of easy problems to solve, but we sure have a great team. Parents for Public Schools I've worked with for I don't know how many years now, from the time that I actually was a young man in my 60s. But we really have a Super Bowl team working together, and that is how we're going to solve the latest and most serious of our fiscal problems. So I'm very, very optimistic going forward.
Great. I want to welcome up Dennis Kelly, the president of United Educators of San Francisco.
Thank you. If Warren Hellman can talk to you about sports, let me talk to you a little bit about finance and long-term finance. Some of you get a little put off or a little confused by the idea of this being a 16-month budget and a $51 million deficit for the city. But that particular thought needs to sink in as you think about what this does. When we talked, you heard a little bit of talk about kindergarten children. It hits in the kindergarten first. Then as class sizes grow, because the money the state sent down to us allows the class sizes to be increased in K through 3. As class sizes grow, that individual child who came into kindergarten now gets less attention. That hand that goes up is seen less often, and that child's education is then in jeopardy. That child gets through elementary school and makes it into middle school and survives all the hormonal rage of middle school. And that child gets into 9th grade. The state used to provide a reduction in class size in math and English. The particular reason is because it is the most fragile time in the child's existence. This is the point where kids walk away because they can't comprehend what's going on. So we had reduced class sizes in 9th grade. The state has taken that away. The money is gone from that. The money that is gone from education is going to hurt individual children, starting in kindergarten. When Eric Marr picked up the same line that we used last year at this year about a coalition, last year at this time, about a coalition of the outraged, that is what we must be. We cannot stand this. You cannot allow the people who deadlocked the budget in Sacramento so that you could end up having them take half of the closure of the gap in terms of cuts out of education. It is absolutely ridiculous. It is unacceptable. No one of you who's going out to lunch is going to go to a schoolyard and go through the kids' pockets to take their pocket change in order for you to go to lunch. You wouldn't do it. You don't think about children that way, and yet that's what happened in Sacramento. We cannot allow that to continue. We are moving in the right direction here. San Francisco values must prevail. We must take care of one another. We cannot harm our children this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. And now Jim Dierke, who represents United Administrators of San Francisco.
Thank you. There are 140 school administrators who this evening will be notified that their services may not be needed next year. That represents 1/2 of the administrators in San Francisco. Now, you really need good leadership to field a team, Warren, you know, since you're talking about sports. And I think that we really need to work hard with this coalition and be outraged of what's happened. But there is hope, and these people up here represent the hope with their leadership to bring us out of this mess in San Francisco and be a shining light and an example for the rest of the state of California, because we are leaders in San Francisco, and we're going to show everyone our leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And now if we can welcome up Suzanne and John, who represent the great advocacy group Parents for Public Schools, to share a few words. Thank you.
Hi. To put a personal note on what layoffs mean, last year 9 out of 13 teachers at my child's elementary school got layoff notices. But thanks to the rainy day fund last year, they were rescinded. I don't know how many will get it this year, but when you think of a whole school and the personality of the school and how the teachers work together, that really changes the whole dynamic of the school. It changes how the children feel about their school when they don't know what's going to happen to their teachers, what's going to happen to their classes. And it makes it very personal for the parents, because we, as parents, support our teachers and our schools. So I really wanted to thank the city for standing behind our schools. It makes a big difference as a parent in San Francisco to know that so many of our city leaders are here and supportive of our public schools. Thanks.
And I'll just add briefly, as a parent with a second grader in a San Francisco public school, I can attest that we have an incredible district. We have incredible schools, we have incredible teachers, despite all of the challenges we face today. In hard times, the public schools are more important to parents than ever. And to see our incredible district under siege is both saddening and infuriating. At the same time, I'm grateful to live in the city of San Francisco, to be able to work as a parent and just as an average citizen with Parents for Public Schools, the district, the Board of Education, and all of the city officials you see here today. Thank you.
Questions?
Mr. Mayor, ultimately the controller will be the one to determine how much of the rainy day fund will, if the district will qualify for, which could be up to 25% of the fund, which is about $24 million, I think. What I'm hearing today, despite the fact that you're putting children first, is that you're not committing today to giving them the maximum that they would qualify for.
Well, we don't know that that's the maximum they're qualified for.
But you're not committing today to whatever the maximum is.
No, we'll commit to getting the facts first and then assessing what we can do. It's an old-fashioned commitment. Seek first to understand and then communicate what you're intending to do. Things are changing dramatically. And for example, some folks thought the rainy day reserve had $98 million. I heard that this morning. It doesn't. It has 92. We drew down $6 million. People were unaware of that. Second, as you know, this will be the first time in our city's history since 2003 when we put the rainy day reserve to the voters, and it was supported, that both the school district and the city are eligible for drawdown of these funds. So we're looking back to the intent not only of the sponsor of the legislation and the collective wisdom of the entire board, or at least most of the board that supported it at the time, but also the voters. And that's what's being assessed by the controller. And that's important and responsible. Second, if we draw down 50%, as we will, of the eligible rainy day funds to offset cuts to homeless programs, mental health programs, and to our most vulnerable population, that's where the dollars are going to go, then if we drew down 50%, we'd have $46 million remaining, of which 25% of that $46 million is the 11.5 that I told you. Now, if you believe that we shouldn't draw that down, and we should not use that money to offset those cuts to the most vulnerable population, and we should instead reserve those dollars for the school district, then you can argue for that number that you referenced. But that's why the controller is going to assess all of those facts and make a determination. Here's the final point. Things are still extraordinarily fluid at the federal level. These numbers can change yet again. And I want to really underscore this point. The stimulus dollars that are being drawn down are not static. They're extraordinarily dynamic. We had a big press conference yesterday with our 65 department heads. We're going to be very aggressive going after not just formula dollars and making sure we got our fair share of the formula, but also on the competitive dollars. And that will impact as well what the state is doing similarly and may reduce that $8.4 billion cut. And then, as a consequence, change our formulas on the rainy day, change our formulas in terms of what we can do. So I don't want for a moment people to throw out numbers that aren't yet accurate because they're based upon information that existed last week, not information that exists today and will exist in the next few weeks and months. But our intention here is to make sure that the school district is aware of our collective commitment in the budget that I will submit. That needs to be balanced by June 1st, that the money will be available to rescind at least 130 notices for layoffs and as much as 160.
So the number today is based on 25% of what would be left after the city draws down, and that's one interpretation that you
well,
it's of the.
By the way, this is not automatic. This has to. The only way this can happen is with the mayor and the Board of Supervisors. It's not, the controller doesn't dictate this. There's no formula here. It has to come with our collective concurrence. And so what I'm saying is that's a minimum of what people should expect. And that's not insignificant. I will not mention, but I had 2 people call me last night that think this is a colossal mistake. Because this money, we don't have to extend these dollars. We got a big deficit next year and the year after potentially, and we won't have these dollars to draw down. And this is literally, we say, I'm with Supervisor Campos, I want to save the Children's Fund, I want to save the Health Department, I want to save Human Services, but let's be honest with people. Something's got to give somewhere. And so that means there's not money for these same kids when they leave school. And their health care or their child care. So, on one hand, you're doing something to help the teachers, on the other hand, you may be actually hurting the kids. So we have to be thoughtful about all this. And this is a show of remarkable unity, and it's a very significant moment. But it's the first moment in our city's history where we have to make the really tough choice. We're both eligible for the drawdown. We both have major crisis in terms of the challenge to address next year's budget shortfall. We've addressed locally the crisis of the mid-year shortfall. That's why we're not in a crisis in the mid-year. But next year, we have a big challenge ahead of us, and both of us. So we have to work together. This is a very strong guarantee of a minimum amount of money, and I think that's a very significant thing.
So if you could draw down more than this $11 million, you would?
I have no problem. In fact, I think it was Dennis who told me 2 weeks ago, said, please don't mention the rainy day just yet. I've been so eager to talk about this, so I'm about as far out front as I possibly can be in terms of my desire to move this thing forward. But I also have an extraordinarily difficult job because everybody here will have no problem criticizing me when my budget's submitted and say, how could he cut this and cut that? And then I'll remind them of this press conference. And they'll say, well, that's not good enough. I would have still done it differently. Fair enough. It's the burden. I loved that job, supervisor. It was a much more interesting job because I used to play Willie Brown all the time. And he had surpluses and we were still making cuts. I have my conscience as well. And I know by the way, I received all the 25% cuts from from the departments on Friday. I know what's on that list. And they're not a human being in the city that's going to be satisfied if that list is the final list. And so I have to look at all of these things, and the board does as well in their process and the add-backs, and I hope there's some add-backs this year.
Mayor, I'm sure it's a great relief for the 130 teachers whose jobs have been saved today, but what about the other 200 teachers for next year and the half of the administrators?
That's why this is not static. We're going to Washington, D.C., and I know, people say that all the time and they come back with nothing. It's a very different environment. And again, that was the purpose of our press conference yesterday. There's billions and billions of dollars in education. They've doubled the education budget in this country in the next 120 days will be doubled. We're going to go after those dollars. State of California, I hope, is doing everything it can to go after those dollars to offset the $8.4 billion in cuts. That may dramatically impact this discussion here today because we may not be facing a $51 million problem over the next 16 months. So we're doing all of these things. And to the extent there's additional dollars with Prop H or dollars here, in-kind contributions that we can make to the school district, that may offset some of these cuts as well. And Carlos and our budget team, we're going back and forth to look at the totality of the budget. So it's not static. These numbers aren't absolute. They're changing dramatically. And I think, candidly, they're going to get better. They're not going to get worse. They will get better. Can't get much worse anyway. But they certainly, from my humble perspective, are going to get a lot better.
We were told that you have another press conference regarding the stimulus today. Is that correct? So we're
that yesterday.
Okay, so
it was unbelievable.
I was there.
Yeah.
I was there.
Any other questions for these guys, not just me? Thank you all very much. Thank you guys for being on.